talk about ancient Africa, a lot of people only hear about Egypt. They show us pyramids, they show us the pharaohs, they show us the Nile. But they don't always tell us that Southern Egypt, it was another powerful African civilization, right? The kingdom with its own kings, its own queens, its own armies, its own pyramids. And at one point, this African empire didn't just live in the Egypt. It challenged Egypt. It ruled Egypt. That kingdom was Kush. You know what I learned about Kush? Maybe look at history differently, right? Because so much of Black history in it's taught like it starts with slavery. Like we just appear to history already broken, right? Already conquered, already struggling. But that's not the full story. Before slavery, before colonization, before the maps were redrawn, African people were building kingdoms, controlling trade, routes, create art, raising armies, study religion, working hard and shaping the world around them. The Kingdom of Kush was one of those civilizations. And it wasn't small, and it wasn't weak. It was something forgotten. It was like a forgotten tribe sitting on the edge of Israel. Kush was a major African power, man. Look, it rose in Nubia in the region of South Egypt, Nile River. And that mattered because the Nile was life. Whoever understood the Nile understood farming, trade, travel, and power. Kush controlled valuable land, coal, iron, cattle, trade routes. And over time, Kush became rich, organized. But here's what makes the story even deeper, right? Egypt and Kush were connected for centuries. Sometimes they traded, sometimes they fought. Sometimes Egypt tried to control Kush. But eventually the balance changed. Kush became strong enough to win. And then something happened that most people never hear about. Our slave planes became pharaohs and either little Africa. They call it the ancient world. They became known as the Black Pharaohs. And that right there should make people think, stop and rethink everything that they knew. Right, that's the history of like power all in all directions. They have one for the band. All right, Kush possibly Kush show for that African civilizations will have a bunch of history. They were just make history happen, right? The Kush, like pharaohs, in Egypt during the 25th Dynasty, they restored temples. They respected ancient traditions. They saw themselves as protectors of the sacred order. They were conquerors. They were builders. They were rulers. They were leaders stepping into one of the biggest stages in the ancient world. And as a Black person, when you hear that, it's different. Because it reminds you that our history is lonely. Our history is cowards. Our history is strategies, leaders, and legacy. That's what's really powerful because of Egypt. That's important. Kush was not great because it touched Egypt. Kush was right on his own. Later, the kingdom was considered to the power of Meroë. You know what I'm saying? The Meroë was famous for non-production trade pyramids. They built more pyramids than Egypt. Small. But I got the vision. Royal homes, temples of iron, workers, merchants, and ways. Where they yet was still looking at the old school and very near. Here the name Kush, and that's why the story matters. Because when history is missing pieces, and then they started thinking Africa had no empires, no science, no politics, no architecture, no military outside technology. As evidence that this leverage on Kush was, Kush was powerful, Kush was organized, and Kush sat behind mountains that are still standing in bay. Now the question is, why people know about it? Why is Egypt treated like nobody in African races? Why are African kingdoms so often left out unless they connect to another civilization? That's what makes it so important. It forces us to widen the story. It reminds us that Africa was not evil. Africa was not silent. Africa was not waiting to be discovered. Africa had nations. Africa had roots. Africa had history. And the Kingdom of Kush is proof. So when we talk about Black history, we can only talk about what was taken from us. We also have to talk about what we built. We have to talk about the kingdoms, queens, the warriors, the cities, pyramids, the knowledge, the legacy. Because before the world tried to erase our story, our ancestors was already writing it in stone. And Kush is one of those stones still speaking.